Welcome back to another episode of the Rink Masters podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Kroom, and I'm joined today with my three amigos here. Got Chris Penner. How you doing, Chris?
Doing well, getting prepped up for my work shift at 10:30. So podcast and work.
Right on. That sounds great. And Alex has joined us today as well. So we got a bit of our European perspectives guy coming on the pod. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm also a little bit tired and I got some chores to do. So, other than that, podcasting is the game. All right, Noah, how about you? Last but not least.
Oh, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty excited for this episode. You're going to tell us what we're going to do here, but yeah, it's pretty exciting, and I guess that's just where I'm at right now.
Right on. All right. So, today we've taken up the initiative to play a little bit of armchair GM. We were picking teams that we got to pick one team actually each who we want to rebuild, a team that's outside of the playoff picture, a team that, what the moves that we would make to really make them into a contender and to build them up properly. I picked the New York Rangers. Chris, who'd you pick?
I ended up picking the Arizona Coyotes.
Solid choice. And Alex, I believe you mentioned you were going to pick Vancouver.
Yes, I did. They have they have a considerable amount of Europeans in there, and I figured I'd give in some Canadian representation.
That's awesome. And Noah, who did you pick?
I picked the Nashville Predators, which as I was doing it, I thought that, wow, this was such a mistake. I should not have picked the Predators. This is a gong show. But yeah, I gave it a go. And we'll see what you guys think.
Awesome. All right. Well, Alex, it's been a while since you've been on the podcast, so I'll let you tee this one off. What have you done?
Well, I didn't make a whole lot of changes, except that I made sure to basically I since I noticed that their cap space was extremely limited, and already this late in the season, it would have been difficult for them to find any good players. I figured I'd set them up for basically damage control. So getting rid of players whose contracts are coming to an end and who are just extremely costly, and just trying to replace them with younger players who, can become a lot better with Vancouver, specifically focusing on defense, as that has been a top priority in the North Division. So first off, I ended up trading Edler for Zaitsev, mainly because I find Edler hasn't stood out for me. But I found that Zaitsev would probably do better if he was on any team but the Ottawa Senators. But that could be said about any player. And I ended up swapping Ben for Jews from the Red Wings, along with basically getting rid of Holtby and swapping him out with Bernier for a second string goalkeeper. And then getting rid of Gaudette for Calgary's third round pick, just as a final way of cutting costs.
Not bad, not bad.
And improving the Calgary Canucks there too. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, certainly. Noah, who did you, what moves did you make for your team?
So I made a few more moves. I made 6 trades in total. So the first one I found as a suggested trade for Nashville, and I actually quite liked it myself after I looked into it a bit more. It was Matt Duchene to the Columbus Blue Jackets for Gustav Nyquist and Liam Foudy. I like that trade a lot, and I mean Duchene played really well in Columbus, and I think that it would make sense for him to go back there, right? Especially if Tortorella is going to stay for a bit longer. Yeah, I mean, they have some players there that they were hoping to step up that haven't quite stepped up in the way that they'd hoped. And for Nashville, that frees up some cap. And then the next move that I made, I sent Victor Arvidsson to Florida on a mediocre Nashville team. He had an even plus minus, right? Which was quite impressive for their forwards as I was looking through it. Almost all of them were in the negatives. And then I sent him to Florida for Brett Connolly and a 4th round pick. Connolly's had a really down season, right? But he's shown that he can have those flashes. He's won the cup. He's played for contenders. And I think he can bring a winning mentality to Nashville that's needed there. And I think that was an important piece of the rebuild. I sent Michael Granland to the LA Kings for a 3rd round pick. He's had a decent season and he's an experienced player. And that team is, they're on the fringe, right? They're on the fringe of the playoffs right now. And that's a pretty young roster too. They do have they do still have a good amount of their cup winning core, but never hurts to add that one more experienced player down the middle who can help them with a bit more support. This one was actually triggered by a move today. We're recording on Sunday with Aaron Ekblad getting injured. He's probably going to be out for the season by the looks of it, which really sucks because he was probably on pace he could have been in the Norris conversation. So I sent him to Florida Ryan Ellis to Florida for Marcus Nudivara, a 1st and a 4th. I mean, Ryan Ellis is a pretty solid defenseman. He's had a bit of a down year with Nashville, but I mean, their top pairing's just not had a great year, and he's shown in the past that he can be excellent. So I thought that move could make sense for Florida, bringing a top level guy there and help solidify their defense a little bit. Mm-hmm. Then I sent Eric Holla to the New York Rangers for a 4th round pick. I mean, they're bottom 6 in fringe top 6. They're kind of lacking in center depth right now. I mean, their top line isn't terrible, but beyond that, it seems like they're kind of struggling in the middle there. And they have some good young wingers. And Eric Holla, he's been on some really good teams, been on some contenders. He's been in the playoffs, and that experience could help out. And he isn't in his 30s yet. I believe he's still 29. So that's a good move there, I thought. And then the last one, it was pretty much a like for like trade. Mark Borowicki for Troy Stetcher. Troy Stetcher's had not the best season there in Detroit, and I think that Mark Borowicki, that team's had a bit of a soft defense, I think. Outside of Danny DeKeyser, who when I was looking, I was actually very surprised. He was an even plus minus. He was their best defenseman this year so far. So I was actually quite surprised by that. But Mark Borowicki still can throw his body around, and they're pretty similar in salary, but Troy Stetcher's a bit less. So that was just to free up a bit more space and kind of bring a new look to the back line there of Nashville, right? Because they've been pretty much the same now for, I think, a few years. So just to try to shake it up a little bit. Yeah, and then I had a few other moves here. Because of the moves I made, I had to shift around the lines a little bit. I have Kelly Yarnroke as the number 1 center, with Forsberg and Nyquist on his wings. And then that was the biggest change that I made there. And I have Eli Tolvanen with Ryan Johansson and Brett Connolly as my second line. Sissons, Kunin, and Grimaldi as my third line. And then Foodie centering Matthew, Olivier, and then Nick Cousins. So I think that's a pretty solid team, and it's one that they can move into the future with. And then obviously I changed the defense quite a bit. So I bumped Dante Fabro up to the top pairing. Marcus Nudivara takes on the second pair, and then Troy Stetcher steps into the third pair. So in lots of the changes that I made actually were based around Dante Fabro. He's been excellent for them this year, and he needs to be re-signed. And he's probably going to want some good money there. So that's kind of the thing. And I was also anticipating Pecorine, I would let him walk. And ask either Yaroslav Askarov or Ingram to step up next season.
All right, not bad. What about you, Chris? What have you done with the Arizona Coyotes?
Arizona Coyotes. Let's get into that. I can try to share my screen here to show you guys. Yeah, right here. You guys can all see that?
Yep.
There it is.
There it is. Okay. So the first trade I made was moving Phil Kessel out. I think he's a good player for a team looking to make a cup run. I have him going to Tampa Bay, receiving Cal Foote and Matthew Joseph back. Two guys that I think would fit Arizona well. Matthew Joseph's having a good season in the bottom six for Tampa Bay, along with Cal Foote, who I think giving him an expanded role in Arizona would do him well. Along with Tampa Bay not having Nikita Kucherov right now. That allows Phil Kessel with that contract to come into Tampa Bay. So I have that move to start. Second move I have is I have Darcy Kemper going to Colorado. Give Colorado a little more depth in net. Retaining $1 million there. Getting Connor Timmins on the back end. So boosting Arizona's back end with Connor Timmins, another young player. I wanted to get younger with this Arizona team and build around some of the core pieces they had, along with bringing back Matt Calvert, just for cap reasons, along with just a little bit more of a veteran presence. You still need that when building a younger team. So I have him on one of my wings. I'll show you guys a depth chart after this. I have Antti Raanta going to Chicago, giving the Chicago Blackhawks a little more goaltending depth, obviously with Lankin and Subban. I don't think it hurts to bring in Antti Raanta. And coming back is Matthias Janmark and a second-round pick for Antti Raanta. So I think that maybe if Chicago wants to try to make the playoffs this year, they can. That gives them an option for sure, as you know, they're kind of on the fringe right now. And then I have Jason Demers going to Florida, obviously with the Ekblad injury as well. I don't have as big of a player going over to Florida, but I have Jason Demers for Hepel and Niemi coming back to Arizona. I thought that's a good trade for both sides there. And then the last one, I have a change of scenery kind of trade. I have Nick Schmaltz going to San Jose, and I have Thomas Hertl coming over to Arizona. Two guys where I think San Jose is not going in the best direction. Nick Schmaltz really isn't doing much in Arizona. So I thought maybe we do a swap there, 1 for 1. There might be picks involved if this happened in real life. But yeah, so that's the kind of the deals I have. Tried to fit it within the salary cap. And then I have my lines right here. So I have Lawson Krause on the top line with Thomas Hertl, Clayton Keller, Janmark with Christian Dvorak, Connor Garland. I want to have Garland playing, lots of minutes. So I think moving Phil Kessel out allows that to happen. Same with Lawson Krause. He's playing already top minutes, but they got some vets in there. Matthew Joseph on the third line with Derek Brassard and Christian Fischer. Maybe Christian Fischer can get going. He hasn't had the best of seasons so far. But if he can get going, that would be a plus for Arizona. He's only eaten up $1 million for the next 2 seasons worth of cap. And then the fourth line, we got Matt Calvert with Hepel and Niemi and Johan Larsson. Solid young fourth line. Hepel and Niemi gets to play with the veteran and Calvert, which will really help his game along. So I like that for the forward core for Arizona, trying to rebuild this team, but not give away all their top assets. I'm going to run Aiden Hill in net. I've really liked what I've seen out of him as a young goalie, and that allows for them to bolster their D-core with moving those 2 goaltenders. And then on defense, Ekman Larson, Goligoski, not a bad top pairing. Jacob Chikrin, super promising with Cal Foote. I think giving Cal Foote that top 4 minutes will be really good for him. And then we got Connor Timmins, Labushkin, and Osterley as your 5, 6, and 7. Fit those guys in where you like. And that's my Arizona lineup. I don't have them making the playoffs with this kind of roster, but I have them maybe making some moves in the next year or two with some young talent in there and guys giving it a real opportunity to play some big minutes for Arizona for sure. So that's what I got. Tyler, what do you got for I believe it's the New York Rangers?
Alrighty, yeah. So I had a lot of fun with this. I'm gonna share with you guys what I've got. All right. So it's interesting. So the Rangers, obviously, they're a team. It's kind of in a tough spot because they've got some really good young players that they've drafted extremely high, and then they've got that mix of veteran players that are kind of starting to slow down. And right now they're sitting at a .500 win percentage. I didn't want to completely blow up the team. I felt like there would be ways to bolster their weaknesses and try and just retool this roster that is going to give them not only, I think, a good chance at squeaking into the playoffs this year, but down the road, they got that longevity aspect of being good to go as their younger players start to develop. So let's go on with some of these trades. The first trade I wanted to make, I made it with Boston. I traded off Chris Kreider with Brett Howden in a 4th and a 2nd round pick to Boston. Kreider, to me, I mean, obviously, he's a big power forward who, at the end of the day, that contract is not going to age very well at all. And I think if there's a time to trade him, it's probably going to be this year. After that, it's going to become increasingly difficult to do so. Jake DeBrusk slumping hard this year in Boston, and there's been rumors about him being moved out this throughout the year. And I feel like the New York Rangers might be interested in a guy like Jake DeBrusk. He's only 24. He's going to bring some bit of an offensive touch if you can use him right. He's a good player. And he's not on an expensive contract, so he's going to fit into the depth side there. It also brought along Trent Federic and 3rd and 4th round picks. So I think this is a deal that's going to benefit both teams in the long run. And I feel like, both GMs will feel happy if this trade were to unfold. So now my next deal, this is a big one. I mean, this is more of a fantasy thing for me, but I wanted to bring Jack Eichel to the New York Rangers. They need that number 1 center. They need that star. Honestly, the clock is almost out for Eichel in Buffalo. I think that this is a deal that could possibly happen. So I brought Jack Eichel, defenseman Henry Yokoharu, and goaltender Linus Ullmark, and a 3rd round pick to New York. And going to Buffalo, Ryan Strome, Philip Chittle, former 9th overall pick Vitaly Kravtsov, goaltender Alexander Georgiev, 2 first-round picks and a 3rd in 2021. Obviously, Buffalo gets a lot of promising pieces here. I mean, the fact they get 2 first-round picks, a former first-round pick, a potential future starting goaltender for them going forward, and a top 6 forward and a 3rd-line winger, I think that's a very good return. And obviously, New York get that star center that's going to really help them out. And it's going to be a really good thing for the Rangers. So right now I did a trade with Minnesota as well. I traded Libor Hajek and a 5th round pick for Ryan Hartman and a 7th rounder. Hartman, in my eyes, is just going to be there to replace the absence of Philip Chittle in the bottom 6. And Noah, this is going to kind of coincide with your team there. I traded for Eric Haula, and I sent DiGuiseppe to Nashville in a 4th for Eric Haula and a 6th. So great minds think alike there.
Not
and
quite
then
the same trade, but you
close
thought that
enough.
Eric Haula, so I mean, I'll take it.
Well, and I did send the 4th, so it's close enough.
Yeah.
And then I flipped Ullmark to Columbus with a 4th round pick and a 7th for Jonas Korpisalo and a 3rd and a 6th. That just works out better with contracts because both Ullmark and Shesterkin had 1 year left on their deals. So I wanted to have a goaltender that was locked in for an extra year to give them some flexibility. So here's how the lines shape up. First line, you got Artemi Panarin, Jack Eichel, Capo Caco. That's a deadly line. I think, going forward, that could be one of the potential top lines in the NHL, like one of the most lethal. That second line there, we got Alexei Lafreniere, Mika Zibanejad, Pavel Buchnevich. Third line, Jake DeBrusk, Eric Haula, and Julian Gauthier. 4th line, got Ryan Hartman, Trent Federic, Kevin Rooney. Defense, I mean, it's pretty much self-explanatory. I didn't tinker it too much. The only addition there is Henry Yokoharu there on that 3rd pair. Everything else stays intact. I really like the pieces they've put in place. Brendan Smith's off the books at the end of the year anyway. So, I mean, I couldn't really trade him out. I didn't think it was going to be necessary. And yeah, I think that's all I got for you guys.
Awesome. Here, I was actually going to quickly see if I can share mine here. Just
get more of a visual for all the people watching.
All right. And here's my roster. Here's how it shakes out. So, like I said, I have a Yarnroke centering Forsberg and Nyquist. I think that top line is pretty good, and I think it gives them a bit more flexibility moving forward. I was actually surprised Philip Forsberg is nearly a point a game this season, and nobody else on the Predators is close right now. So I mean, I was considering trading Forsberg at the start, but then after seeing that, couldn't really, accept that would be possible. But and then yeah, obviously, and this is the other tricky reason. This is why I need to save up some cap space there, because Eli Tolvanen is also on an expiring deal, and he's put together a pretty good season. So you need to have some cap space for him and Fabro. So. And Saros, obviously. So, yeah, there's some big moves here, but I think that this does help out the Predators moving forward.
Right on.
I lost the button, guys. Lost it. Where's cancel? There we go. There we go. All right.
All right. So let's do a quick rating. We're going to start off with Alex's. We're going to go in order, which we started. What are we rating Alex's roster at for the?
Are we going to do this out of 10?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Let's do it out of 10.
Okay. Well, I'll start. I think the biggest thing that I saw was that there's the potential to have difficulty negotiating contracts this offseason. He did shed some cap there, but I think that was the biggest thing that could hurt it. So, like, I did like some of the pieces coming the other way. Like, I like Zaitsev coming to Vancouver. I think he's a bit younger, and I think that there is potential there with the right partner. And I think that the Canucks have struggled to find that balance with some of their defensive pairings this year. So, I mean, that could work out, obviously. Zaitsev could fit in well. And I like the moving out of Jordy Ben and stuff. Like, so I did like lots of the moves. My biggest concern is cap this summer, right? I mean, they have Demko, Pedersen, and Hughes all needing to be re-signed, not counting Jimmy VC and some of those other guys. So, I mean, I think probably a 6 or 7. It's probably good there, because those are some pretty big concerns there, obviously, with those big 3 being re-signed.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I really like what he did with the cap. I like Alex's job with shifting cap and freeing some of that up. I'm not sure if the defense really improves, though. So that's where it's tough for me. The offense obviously stays unaffected, and the core pieces are still there. I'm going to go with, I think I'm going to go with a 6. Because, I mean, cap's a big thing. That's a big thing that Vancouver needs to assess. And I think, yeah, Alex did a really good job with that.
Yeah, I'm keeping my rating as a 6 as well. I think another one we didn't really touch on is the Braden Holtby moving out. I think having him as a backup is really kind of dumb when you can get some assets for him, as well as Thatcher Demko's played this year.
Yeah.
I think having more of a backup like Jonathan Bernier fits that. You probably get a little more than Bernier, I think, for Holtby. If you added a pick, I don't know if you added a pick or not, Alex, but I think you could definitely do that. It allows Holtby to start in Detroit too. So I like that. But like you guys said, it's cap. And those big 3 they got to sign, it's going to be tough. But if they can make it work, I think that'd be they're going to have to make it work. And I think with some of the moves Alex made, I think they put themselves in a better situation to make that happen.
For sure.
Yeah, actually, I like the comment about Holtby there. I really like that, because I think part of the issue is the Canucks right now, they're also in a tough position with DiPietro. So also having Bernier there, he doesn't have quite the same salary cap burden that Holtby does. So there is the potential that you could call up DiPietro to spend some time in the main roster there. And obviously that DiPietro needs to play, and just having him on the taxi squad does hurt. So Alex's move gives the potential for DiPietro to have a bit more flexibility there. So I think that helps it out too.
And with the Seattle expansion draft as well, it makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's pretty good. All right.
So since that we're going in order, let's move on to Noah's roster. Where are we ranking Noah's GM handiwork in at?
I'll start. I think he did some good things. I like how you got Eli Tolvanen in the top 6.
Mhm.
I think that kid could be really good and a really strong player. Obviously, the cap was tough with Matt Duchene moving him out. I would have liked a little bit of a younger piece there with, was it Nyquist you brought in?
Yeah, it was Nyquist
Nyquist, yeah.
and Foodie that I brought in.
Right. I like the Liam Foudy. I think that makes some good there. It's hard with the cap, so I don't mind it. But yeah, not too bad. The only other move I would have made was probably move out of Matthias Ekholm, just because I see his name swirling around a lot, and especially as a pending UFA. But other than that, I like the team. I'll give it probably 6.5.
Yeah, so in terms of Ekholm, he does still have one more year. He isn't expiring this year,
Okay.
which is why his name's being floated around, is because he's in a pure rental. The reason I didn't trade him is because I believe him and Fabro are playing on a line together right now, and they have the best combined plus minus on the team. Like they're playing very well together, and I didn't really want to separate that pairing. That's why I kind of kept that together.
Okay. Well, fair enough.
That's fair. All right, Alex, what do you got for your rating? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think he managed cap way better than I did. Um, so I'd say in terms of being able to make sure that Nashville can actually have some wiggle room, especially in the position that they are in currently, I think he's managed it quite well there. Um, I I mean I didn't I wasn't looking out for any of the particular trades that he was setting up,
Mhm.
but I do think if he can, you know, beat me tenfold uh, in changing cap space, I think he can probably fix up Vancouver in a better way than I can.
No, definitely fair
Although
enough.
you did some brave moves with Vancouver that I probably wouldn't have done. I probably would have just traded Edler for some picks. So the fact that you tried to bring over another defenseman, I appreciate the guts there.
For sure. All right. No, it's tough for me. Like I was looking at that top line, it looks really good. Maybe the only move I would have maybe made is try, like, it's kind of adding on to a move that you did, was to try and bring in some draft picks for Arvidsson, because I feel like Arvidsson has a lot more there. I mean, he's proven to be a 30 goal scorer, and I would think with his cap hit, I mean, it's under 5, that he would probably be a guy that would garner a lot of interest from other teams on the market. But overall, I like the option of bringing in Brett Connolly, though. He's going to bring that that experience to the team. And I mean, a fresh start for Connolly could be really big for him as well, right? Like, he's not a bad player. We've seen what he can do with Washington. He's fully capable of getting back to that. So no, it's not bad. And I like, I like it. Like Chris said, I like that we have Tolvanen in the top 6. And the cap situation is looking excellent there. So I'm going to give it, I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10.
Harsh critic there, man. 6.5 for a great job. I don't know. What's a 10?
Someone has to be a harsh critic.
No. I was going to say though, like especially managing this cap situation, that the reason I first looked at it, I was like, oh crap, they have Philip Forsberg expiring not this year, next year. They had Yarnroke expiring next year. They had at least a few other guys that were expiring next year too, that they've actually been having decent seasons. I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to free up more than just like 2 or 3 million this summer.
Yeah. No,
like
for
I
sure.
need to free up. Like I believe I freed up like 12.7 mil in cap space. So like, yeah, I don't know. I didn't hear what Chris and Alex gave me for number ratings on that, but
Name is Tyler.
I think I would give you probably a 7.5.
oh, thanks, Alex. Means so
I'm being
much
generous.
to me.
I'll be nice to him the most.
Right on. All right, so I'm gonna give you guys the floor here because I can't really rate my own work. So
I guess I'll go first. When we look at your team, I think you did some bold things. You did some things that worked well for both teams. I think my biggest thing with your team, what I liked, is getting Lafreniere and Kako in that top six, and you're giving them the most opportunity to succeed. And I think obviously you got that chemistry with Sabinajad and Buchnevich, and putting Lafreniere on that line. I think that just explodes Laffy's game. So I think that's really good. I mean, Jack Eichel, if you could pull that off, which they don't give up a ton of assets. I mean, Ryan Strom's good, Phil Hedel's good, a couple other guys, but you add that with Kako on that line, I mean, that would be amazing. So if you're able to do that, I think the Rangers team is a contender. Their defense stays the way it is, which is fine. And your goaltending situation's good. I mean, Shesterkin and Korpisalo, that's a solid tandem. And you made a lot of the other teams better too, like moving Kreider out to Boston. I like that as well. So I probably have to give it, for me, probably an 8.5, just with the potential for it to work with Kako and Lafreniere.
Right on.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. I won't go quite as high as an 8.5 because I mean the tricky thing, right, is when you move that many pieces, there's always the chance for especially on a team like the top six of the Rangers has actually been performing pretty well. From what I looked at, I mean, partially that's skewed by their last like 2 games. I think it was Zibanejad. What was that like?
It was like
he had 12 points in 2 games or something like that.
It's like it's crazy. It's like if it wasn't for the Philadelphia Flyer spankings.
Yeah, exactly.
It's inflated. It is inflated.
It won't be quite as good, but I think though that there's always a chance of upsetting some chemistry there. So especially with Chris Kreider moving out, I think he's a big character guy in the locker room. And obviously you are bringing another big character guy in Jack Eichel. But it's always a question of how quickly that settles in, right? So I think that's when you make that many moves, that's my biggest concern. And that's my biggest concern with any move of those proportions. But I think otherwise, like on paper, those are very good moves. So I have to give it 7.5.
Sounds good.
So I guess I should probably give you my rating then.
Yes.
I really liked what you did with the first 2 lines for offense. I do think the fact that you would maintain your second line to be entirely New York Rangers chemistry would play key, especially when you have when you're probably going to use those top players like Eichel so prominently. You know, when you give them a rest, it's probably the best that you'd have a line that can work so synchronously. Yep. If that's even a word.
We'll go with
it. Yeah. But I found it was kind of an interesting move when you took in Ullman and then you rearranged it to give him away to another team for some picks. And I mean, I'd have to applaud you on that, because I think it's something I didn't even come up with. I mean, I probably would have, if I had that idea of pulling in someone like Ullman and then to manage to pull him in for some pretty strong picks, I think I'd probably would have done the same. Yeah, and the fact that you also managed to get it with quite a nice cap space by the end, you know, you're managing it quite well. But yeah, I'd have to applaud the fact that you that you pull in your talent for getting that to maximize your chemistry while still having effective offense. So I'll be the nicest one out of here, and I'll just say 9 out of 10.
Awesome, thanks, Alex.
Oh man, Tyler, that's high praise. I was just going to say one last point. When I first saw that trade with Minnesota, I was like, oh man, did he just take Minnesota's third line, because they've been amazing this year, like their first line? But then I was like, nope, that's the second line. We're okay. Yeah. Because I was remember when I was looking at trades, I noticed that the third line for Minnesota, which Cap Friendly says is currently Jordan Greenway, Joel Eriksson and Joseph Cramarosa. They've in between Eriksson and Greenway, they have a combined plus minus of plus 20. So, I mean, yeah, I was like, I don't know if Minnesota's going to give up one of those guys, but it was okay.
All right.
All right. Are we Chris's team?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. I really like what Chris did. I think he made some logical moves that really shift Arizona into a good spot, because I mean, we got to take into account that, you know, they got penalized for, you know, illegally holding combines. They've really lost out on that Hall deal, like that screwed them over a little bit. So this gives them opportunity. Like Cal Foote, like he has the potential to even, I would say, to be a top line defender in this league. He brings them over. He gets opportunity to grow with that blue line, bolsters the blue line with good young players. Gives Aiden Hill a chance to prove himself. He's currently displaying that he's hungry. So if he's got a chance to take that crease, then that's going to go well. Connor Garland's been one of their best players all year, so getting Kessel out of the way to give him more minutes. And then Thomas Hertl, he has been probably one of the best players in San Jose, and San Jose as a whole has not looked good. And so overall, I think that the roster holds up really well, and I think it's honestly a really good job. I'm going to give that a 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I actually agree with that rating. And I like how you admitted, though, that it isn't a playoff team right now, but that's not the point, right? Point is that obviously, like, the point is that we're rebuilding these teams. So, yeah, I think that fits 7.5 for sure.
Yeah. I'll keep mine short, but I did notice how as much as I don't think Arizona is a fully fixable team, I think you definitely made them have right proper damage control as a franchise, and the fact that you're managing to keep the Stars while pulling in some good second line talent, I think, plus the cap space, can't say that enough. I think you managed it quite well for Arizona, so that as much as they might not go on through the playoffs to win the cup, they'll still be capable enough to do well maybe next year or the year after that. So I'd have to say like probably an 8 out of 10 for me.
All right, so we're just going to go to a quick break, and then we'll come back with the Tim Peel situation and NHL refereeing. Welcome back. Obviously, we just finished with our discussion on how we rebuild a number of NHL teams. We had some good moments and some, some moments of panic, I think. But moving on from that, obviously this past week, there was a pretty big controversy in the NHL. I think that's the best way of putting it. One of the referees, Tim Peel, he was caught on a hot mic saying something that he should not have. So Tyler, why don't you walk us through that situation?
All right. So I'm going to first start off by saying this is honestly nothing new. This happens. I would put money every game in the National Hockey League. And
I think that's why we should discuss it.
Well, yes, and any game of hockey ever. It's interesting because the rule books, I mean, if you look at the rule books, they aren't really built for star players. If you called an entire game by the book, there'd be no pace at the National Hockey League level. Players like Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl would not be able to go unleashed. It would have impacts on the game, and fans would be complaining about that. Everything you can hear about Tim Peel, he's got a lot of really good rapport with the players and with everyone that's involved with officiating within the NHL Players Association. The NHL as an organization. I think it's unfortunate that I got caught on mic. At the end of the day, I feel like that game wasn't unfairly called at all. penalties were low. There was pace. And I'm pretty sure Nashville won anyway. So did it really impact them? I don't think so.
Sorry, what exactly did you say again? Just for those who haven't heard it.
He said that he was going to call a penalty on Nashville early, that he wanted to call a penalty on Nashville early, which that is not an uncommon statement or conversation between officials. I would put
Yeah,
money on it.
so here's the thing. So I haven't been a hockey official, but I'm an official in soccer, right? And I have to say, I think that's just part of refereeing, right? Whether or not it's in those wordings, I think that especially if you've made a mistake in a game, right, or something like that, you might want to make up for it in a small way. Like obviously, if you missed a call that led to a goal, you're not going to just hand the other team a goal, right? But if it's something like a penalty, like you missed a call that you should have given, right, then you might give a call that might have been a bit softer, right? Just to kind of make up for that. And I think that's honest. And unfortunately, that is a part of the game. I understand lots of frustration, but as a referee, I saw a comment on it about how that shouldn't be a part of the game. You just need to teach the refs better. I'm like, yeah, but we're human, right? Like we miss something, right? Like it's a split second, and then you take a half second to think. You're like, oh crap, that was actually a penalty, but it's too late at that point, right? Like it's already too late. So, I mean, is that a fair way to go about the games? That's up for debate, but I think that's just a part of the game. And unfortunately for Tim Peel, he got caught on mic. And I think that's what makes this situation so difficult. Is that how is the NHL supposed to address that? Are they supposed to say, yes, our referees will like make up calls on the go? Like that's kind of hard to defend. Like if you're a referee, you understand. If you're just a fan who has no history in doing any kind of match officiating in any sport, it just seems so wrong, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, that's kind of how I sit on it. I think that this was just an unfortunate situation for Peel, and I think the NHL unfortunately had to fire him. I think that's just the unfortunate situation that they got put in.
Well, and just to keep in mind too, like, you know, the biggest part of being I think a successful official is communication. You're constantly communicating. You're communicating with your fellow officials for the night. You're communicating with coaches, players, everyone in game. Like it's constant communication. Like it's, and that's honestly, that's what that was. And at the end of the day, it's, you know, you got to look at it like, and like you said, they kind of had to fire him. You know, they had to do that quick. And honestly, it might not have been the worst thing. He was going to retire at the end of the year. I would guarantee he's probably getting a severance within that as well. So I think that's really good. But it's just unfortunate. I mean, Tim Peel, he's a referee that's been around for a long time, right? So, I mean, this was going to be what he's remembered for, which I think is a little unfortunate. But yeah, I think fans might need to just settle down a little bit and maybe look at it from the perspective. I think there's a lot of give or take, right? Players aren't perfect. Officials aren't going to be A+ all the time. There's got to be a little bit of grace periods and give or take. And it's just unfortunate that it played out this way.
Yeah. So quickly, just before I hand this off to Alex, I was going to say, how does the, like, and this is kind of where I want to go with this, where does the NHL move forward with this? So just something to consider while Alex does his answer for just his general thoughts on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you were saying, you know, having that rectifying call whenever you make a mistake, you know, it is kind of a natural thing for refs to do. And it is kind of part of the profession where if you're going to make a mistake and it's going to cost someone, you know, you're going to want to make sure that it's balanced out, especially if it's something soft. So if you've set the precedent for a soft call in a certain manner, like say a very iffy tripping call, you got to call it if you see it happen the exact same way the other way around. Like if the other team does it to the first penalized team, then Yeah, but if of course it can be it works right into your lap if the first call was iffy, but then the first one or the second one isn't, and it goes to the other team. Then that fits perfectly, because then it doesn't feel like you're internally, you don't feel like you're having to bend your own um, integrity, because it's not like you'd want it, like as much as you want to get that balancing call, you don't want to get that balancing call. You don't have to want to, if you get what I mean. Like it's basically, no one wants to get in that situation where the first call it was a mistake, so now you're at a point where you kind of feel bad, and it feels like you're in yourself that you're trying not to seem like you're calling one way and you're not calling the other.
Well, yeah.
So, oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, and I was just going to build on that, and you make a good point. And if you go watch it, all these NHL games and see how they're called on by officials' perspective. I mean, if one team's had 2 power plays in a row, how much you want to bet the other team's kind of due for one? And more often than not, you'll see a penalty called to the other team, and it starts to even out in that aspect. And so, do you, as hockey fans, do you not want that? Right? Like, do you not want to get some power plays for your team? Because it's give or take. So you made an excellent point there, Alex.
Yeah, I'd say, like, whenever that happens, if it happens early in the game, there isn't a whole lot of problems, which is why he specified early in the game.
Exactly.
Because later in the game, when you have to still call back on that precedent, it really feels like a stretch at that point. And instead, it doesn't feel like these are just 2 iffy calls to balance each other out. Instead, it feels like there's an iffy call at the beginning, and there's an iffy call at the end, and they don't feel like there's as much connection. And, and so it is a little bit difficult. And especially when it's hard to get fans to understand, because that's kind of a problem where you have one group that's entirely on one side. So no matter what no matter what happens to their team, if it happens to their team, no matter if it's iffy or justified, it's going to be like their reaction is going to be as knee jerk as possible, and it's going to be very clear on whose side it is.
Yeah.
And the best thing to for a referee, the big thing is you definitely don't want it to seem like you're playing for one side or the other. I mean, I know I've refed games where coaches will say that. I've had games where the coach from either side have said it in the same game, which ultimately to me is like the ultimate complement of neutrality. But in the end, I'd say for fans, they're going to have like this whole knee-jerk reaction, but if they really get what they want, they're not going to like it.
No.
That's the big thing. You never concede to fans in that way.
No.
Especially something so structural, made for their entertainment. It's very much, yeah.
No, for sure. Like, fans need to be very careful about what waters they're treading here, because if they want to see highlight goals every night, they want to see their star players on the power play. Well, they might want to be a little hush hush and let this kind of move on. And that actually is a really good segue into what Noah was saying. Like, where does the NHL go from here in terms to this? I'm gonna say they need to not do anything. I think they need to they've already fired Peel. I think they need to sit on it and just let it die over. I don't think any big, miraculous thing needs to change to the structure of how games are officiated.
Here's what I was going to say. I think that was very unfortunate, because it could have been such an out of context comment, right?
Well,
it could have just
100%.
been, I want to do a penalty to kind of, set the tone of the game. I'm not going to be like letting things go. And it could have just been like, oh, dang, I thought there'd be a penalty on that play. I was going to give one to Nashville early. All right. Like it could have simply been that. He was hoping to give a penalty to set the tone. All right. Like, just don't do anything stupid. And then simply there wasn't a penalty on the play. And then he's like, oh, dang, I want to give a penalty on that one. Right. Like that's as simple as it could have been. And without that context, I think it's very hard for fans to understand. Right. And I think that part of the thing, right? One of the most respected referees ever, just like just goes beyond hockey, just in sports. In soccer, there's this referee. I can't remember his name right now. Alex, I'm not sure if you remember what his name is. He was on the cover of one of the FIFA games. He's the only referee to ever be on the cover of a sports game. Like where he was the title person for that game.
Interesting.
That's how respected he was. Like nobody would mess with him. The second you were there, like you knew what, like you'd listen. He just carried that. And I think part of the issue with this for the NHL moving forward, referees have already been losing so much respect in the NHL because with so many rule changes, like for example, they introduced tougher rules on cross-checking a number of years ago. And then the past playoffs, nothing was getting called in terms of cross-checking, right? So fans are like, where is this call? Like 95% of these cross-checks should be penalties, but none of them are getting called, right? So I think that for the NHL, moving forward, it won't be to directly address the Tim Peel situation in terms of what they do. I think they just need to try to introduce more consistency with those kinds of calls. Because if they don't want the Tim Peel situation to blow up again, there needs to be more respect for the refereeing in the NHL in general. That's my opinion on it. I think that, for example, with cross-checking, actually start calling the cross-checks. They're illegal, just call them, right? Like obviously it'll be painful for the first few games, but then once the players get used to it, they won't try it anymore, right? Like it's just become such a part of the game. And I think that that's part of the thing that's eroded a lot of trust for referees. So then when something like this comes out, an out of context hot mic, people are going to explode. They're going to pounce at it because it's like, how corrupt are your officials? Right. And right. And then it just blows up. So I think the best step for the NHL is just address that consistency in officiating. Don't say that something's illegal and then not call it. I think that's
well, the
that's
rule book, I mean, they make so many adjustments to the rules. Like it seems like when you're a ref, the game gets faster, more changes get implemented. What do you do? Right. And a lot of these refs, like longtime refs like Peel, they've been calling games for a couple decades now. So they've seen a couple decades of NHL hockey, and the game is not the same as it was even half a decade ago. Like it's progressed that much. So you get a bunch of different perspectives in a game. Like it kind of makes for a hot mess, and it's
well, exactly, right.
It's
and
very,
that's
very
where the
difficult.
consistency needs to come in, right?
Well, how do you get that? You've got multiple decades worth of, officials. You've got the rule books that have been changing throughout their lifetime. The game's getting faster. They're losing some rapport with players, and what do you do?
Well, I think that there's
it's kind of a big it's a big ask to really solve it. Like I think that's something that's honestly just going to take time. It's a lot more of a longevity thing. It's not.
Yeah.
It really isn't.
Well, and I think here's one of the first steps that they can do to address this, and this has been leveled at a bunch of sports. So, in terms of the difference in officiating between regular season and playoffs, or early game, late game, or in terms like different sports, even racing today, there was a massive controversy in the F1 race in Bahrain. There was some confusion over the exact wording of some of the rules, and it totally exploded, right? So in terms of how things are ruled. And I think part of that, you can't have like part of it, I think, is just making sure like officials like either call in the NHL specifically, call the regular season like you call the playoffs, or call the playoffs like you call the regular season. I think that's the first place to start, because I think that with that difference, lots of people are like, why would you do that differently? Right? Like, I think they understand to some degree, but then it's also harder to gain respect for referees, is that then it becomes hard to know what's actually the line. Right. And like, I know for myself as a referee in soccer, like that's hard too, right? Because the second you go, oh yeah, but it's let a few more things slide. And then if you're doing that and then you're off for a few months and then you come back and then you're kind of muddy on what the exact level of contact you're supposed to allow is, right? So I think that just be like, no, call it the same no matter when it is in the season. Right. I think that's one of the first steps there.
I mean, would you want to have that point made for the playoffs?
Well, like I said, either ref the regular season like the playoffs, or the playoffs like the regular season. I think you could go either way there, but either way, I think it needs to be, I think it should just be the same throughout. If you're going to let more things slide, let it slide throughout the whole season.
Because where I fall on that, I think every game should be officiated like a playoff game. I think the best hockey we have is in the playoffs. Low penalties, like letting pace happen, letting players get in grooves, don't interrupt the pace. That's when teams are at their best. I think we need to see that all year.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that, Alex?
I agree with Tyler, especially especially on the question on consistency. We would just know that fans would just want high action, high pace games. So if we were to establish that consistency between like basically play reffing regular season and playoffs as the same, well, ultimately people are going to want to see games like the playoffs all season long.
Well, that's my point. Right?
Yeah.
Like, and part of the issue is that the rule book supports more the regular season play right now. So if you're going to want to ref like the playoffs all season long, right, and if that's what the fans want, you need to change the rule book to match that, right? Because again, part of the thing with the cross-checking this past year especially, it was constantly cross-checking. Like every time there was a puck battle, even if it wasn't even really a puck battle, all I could see on the ice was cross-checking, it seemed, for like stretches of a few minutes. That's what it looked like, right? But since cross-checking is legal in the regular season, like not like to the full extent of the rule book, but there was more of that being called. So to lots of people, right, it's why not now? Like obviously it's the playoffs, but it seems so much different, right? Like I think that for the NHL, part of that, you need to change the rules to reflect how you actually want the game to be played, right? So if you're going to let lots of those slide, actually have the rules reflect that, right? Actually have it be like, define what you'd actually consider one that you would actually call, right? Instead of just saying, oh yeah, this is cross-check, this is cross-check. Cross-checking's illegal, yo, run with it. It just feels like there's a lot of that right now from the NHL in terms of the attitude. It's like, but just ref the regular season like it's the playoffs and make the rules reflect that, because I think that that's what most people want to see. And it's just hard to accept the difference in the refereeing, I think, between the regular season and the playoffs. And I think the Tim Peel situation just makes that even harder with the loss of respect that's seemingly continuing to happen. And now with this, I think the NHL really needs to consider that as a step to take, because as we've discussed, they've already pretty much done all they can. The Tim Peel situation, I think we've discussed that referees, that's just a natural thing. That isn't something that you just tell a ref not to do, because believe it or not, they don't tell us to do that. That's just something that referees do, right? That isn't something that they necessarily like tell us strictly, do not do that ever, but it's also not something that they encourage, right? So I don't know. Like, I just think that moving forward, one of the best things is to find consistency in the rule book and in terms of the way that games are actually run in between the regular season and the playoffs.
All right.
So, and the next question that I really had was Peel kind of a scapegoat? Was he kind of just the person that the NHL just felt like, you know what, let's just use him. Let's just kind of fire him. Let's just try to and hopefully get this to bed. Or do you think that they'll actually address the situation? Do you think they'll actually address steps to help hopefully build more trust in referees moving forward, actually like clean that up? Or do you think that this is kind of just, yeah, it was just him. Just, yeah, he's out of here now. We're good.
I would tend to think that it's just to appeal the mob. I think it's to show the people that are genuinely upset about on the internet that they're doing something. You know, they're taking care of it. But in terms of like addressing a bigger problem, I'm not sure if they're really going to do that. I think it's more PR. It's a PR move.
Absolutely. I think from any way that you look at it, you know, ultimately it's just the NHL saving face and just kind of having this whole thing of like, oh, I didn't realize we had all this deep-seated kind of corruption. It's just this like,
Yeah.
this
Who's
pretend.
This one guy, trust us.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, oh, what's that? He's just here's this long decorated referee with this long career, and it's like, so referees already have the reputation of doing exactly what he has been caught doing, and he's had this long decorated career, and only now that we listen in, to get in on what referees are talking about, suddenly what we hear them talking about, we don't like it.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's
it's like,
exactly it.
yeah, it's like, why don't they talk about the things that we want them to talk about, and instead, it's a little ridiculous, especially because it's like, it's almost like there's an expectation for it to be more theater than an actual game.
Yeah.
And frankly, that can get a little bit annoying, especially with the expectation put on referees that it's as if they're supposed to be automatons, that
You're telling me I'm supposed to be a robot?
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. That's the expectation that they put on all the time. It's basically just like you're gonna have like this robot that's supposed to call objectively, and then anytime he doesn't call the way you want him to call, you're gonna have to scream at him the way that you'd scream at a malfunctioning PS4. So
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, and it's just that, like, I mean, I've also refed as well, and I mean, obviously, Alex, we refed minor hockey, but it's the same thing. We deal with the same stuff. A coach or some crazy hockey mom comes up to you and it's like, you didn't call a fair game. Well, it's like, what do you do? Like, there's one of those.
You ask her what's an offside, and she's like, I don't know. You're like,
oh, I'm sorry. Is your kid over there Tom Sestito?
I love hearing that coming from both sides.
Yeah.
Because it's just like the perfect balancing act. If both sides can hate me for not calling a fair game,
then you've done your job.
Clearly. Yeah, I've done my job.
Yeah, well, it's just that, like, you're in a position where all eyes are on you, and you're going to be blamed for somebody's team's failures, because certainly their team poops sunshine and rainbows and they can't be terrible. Like, you're just going to deal with coaches that think you're the devil. You're going to get all of it. And I think it's unfortunate because it is, I mean, we're not on that big stage where we're at a minor hockey level, but the national level, all eyes are on you, all the pressure's there. You're going to hear it from all ends. I mean, I honestly like. I kind of feel bad for a lot of officials that are in that situation. It's just unfortunate that
Absolutely.
happened.
Absolutely. I think the fact that fans are upset, like when fans get upset, that's fine because they can get upset over
Yeah.
the smallest thing, and this is the one party in the entire discussion that has the reputation of throwing food onto the ice. So I wouldn't take much input from them, but
Yeah.
when you compare that to when you have the team specifically complaining, uh, especially like you get it if they don't like that they got the first iffy call, but if the other side gets the second iffy call, clearly they're not getting they're not making the 2 and 2.
Right.
But really, any time that you see like this a clear penalty, it gets called, and then they're still complaining. Well,
Yeah.
at that point, I at least personally, I end up thinking to myself that they probably just don't have faith in their penalty killing, and that they're just upset that now they have to, bite down and try not to get scored on. And it's like, okay, clearly you should probably rearrange how you're going to practice instead of taking out your anger on me doing my job.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually really funny. I think it's actually quite comical. You watch a game, right, and you see a clear infraction. Like it's not even questionable. Like that's a penalty, and they're like, "What did I do?" And they're arguing their way to the bench, and it's just like, come on. It's like what you did.
Yeah. So I've had that so many times. I've given out a yellow card. The person comes up to me, is like, "What did I do?" I'm like, "You missed the ball and you hit his legs."
Yeah.
No, so so just final question here before Tyler takes us out. Do you think hot mics for referees, they're going to be either taken out of the game, or do you think that they're going to be just more limited? Because I think that I don't see them being expanded, or I don't know. I don't see them being used more extensively for refs unless there's a lot of fan pressure. So where do you see hot mics kind of going?
I think they're going to be more limited. I think they're going to do a better job at picking their times of having the mic on. Because at the end of the day, like you can easily manipulate, a 5-second clip of a conversation. Like I think that if I'm an official in the National Hockey League, I'm going to be submitting an email to the commissioner saying, Gary, we need to not have mics. We need to severely limit our use of these mics. We need to protect our jobs.
Yep. Alex?
Absolutely. I think, what they're being, what now it seems like they're going to be used as, it kind of defeats the entire point of having them. They're not some sort of way of constantly listening in on the refs mutterings to the point where it's just you have the mob mentality who gets to judge on literally everything that the ref says. The entire point of them is because you see refs talking to the players a lot, and a lot of the time it is funny stuff and it's entertaining, and people want to hear that. They don't. I don't think anyone should really care for or really needs to listen to when the refs end up like just going off and just kind of having to discuss between each other. I mean, sure, sometimes it might be interesting to see what they're talking about when they get in their semicircle, but at the same time, that's that's when they're interacting between themselves. It's not going to be nearly as interesting as them talking to a player explaining what he did wrong.
Well, exactly. And I like the mics for the in-game stuff. Like you said, like it brings the fan to a more personal connection to what's going on in game, and it gives them that inside look and that idea of like, this is how this works. But that's got to be it. that's the only time you should be wearing a mic.
No, I agree, and I think that though I think what it will boil down to though is fan pressure. I think that the NHL will have a very hard time limiting the use of hot mics or limiting what they're used if the fans of the league if there's a massive outcry for more accountability for officials. I think the NHL will have a very hard time resisting that. And as a referee myself, obviously I'm not a hockey referee, but I find that very concerning myself, because as much as I understand the accountability aspect, if it was to be monitored at all times by anything, I'd want it to be the refereeing authority, right? If I made a mistake or something and they caught it, I'd want them to call me on it, rather than some just random person from the league or any fans or broadcasters or anything, them harping at me, telling me how to do my job. Because I know I'll make mistakes, but I don't want people who have not been trained as referees. I don't want people who haven't been in those situations and stuff telling me what to do. That's my opinion on that. But
yeah, I mean, they're already monitored in the sense that like they are evaluated constantly. Like they do have that going on. And I would say like the league needs to not cave into fan pressure, right? Like if I'm the NHL, I'm just like, no. You got to someone has to set a standard and someone has to put the foot down. The league has to be the one to do it. If they're going to let the angry mob dictate their decisions, then I mean, you're failing as an organization, in my opinion. The league has to put their foot down on this. And
awesome.
I mean, Gary Bettman, he's proven that he can do that. So hopefully, I think he'll do that.
All right. Well, I think that kind of wraps up that discussion. So, Tyler, why don't you take us out? Obviously, unfortunately, Chris wasn't here for this section of our discussion. He had to head off to work. But, I mean, obviously, he did some great work with his Arizona Coyotes rebuild. And I think Tyler did end up winning that. I think he got the most points out of all of us. So, congratulations, Tyler. I mean,
Thank
I
you.
think a huge part of that was bringing Eichel in, but we can't really argue against that.
You know, it takes a good GM to bring in a player like Eichel.
Yeah, but obviously, so that was our episode. Let us know what you thought about our rebuilds in the comments. Let us know who you think did the best job. And obviously, if you have any other comments or thoughts about the NHL refereeing discussion and Tim Peel, we'd love to hear that. So, Tyler, why don't you take us out?
All right. Well, thank you very much for tuning into this week's episode of the McMasters podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next week.